Hey folks, Dr. Mike Israel here for Renaissance Periodization. I think that's the most I've ever abbreviated my last name. Israel. Size, strength, and aging. Let's figure out how to train for size and strength, what to expect at the different levels of human age. What are they? We're going to talk about general differences and principles of training if you're from anywhere between 15 and 30 years old. Like if you're less than 15 years old, that's another special topic of how to train teens. I'll cover years from now or something. We have a whole laundry list of things to cover. So don't worry, that's coming at some point. But 15 to 30 years old, general category. Next one is 30 to 40 years old, then 40 to 60 years old, and then 60 years old plus. And at the end, we'll have some really good take-home messages for all of that stuff. So 15 to 30 years old, you can expect your best responses to both size and strength training. Okay, this is where you make your best absolute gains. There's no huge difference within this range. There are some differences, but generally speaking, if someone's like 17 years old and they're like, what kind of gains can I expect if I start training? Or if they're like 27 years old and they're like, what kind of gains can I start when or can I expect when I start training? There's not a huge difference between those answers. It's not like, oh, 27, you're a fucking old man. Like you had amazing gains that entire time, or as amazing as your genetics allow. You recover really quickly generally from joint stress, so you can repeat back to back pretty heavy, no problem. If you get hurt, the injury recovery process is what I've termed uncomplicated usually. Like you get hurt, your muscle gets pulled or torn, the surgeons stick it back on or just heals on its own. You come back, you rehab, you go, you live for a while, then a few months later, it's like it never happened or pretty close. Nothing too crazy, nothing to worry about. So this kind of rewards going hard and heavy because even if you get hurt, of course you do your best not to, but even if you get hurt, it's not the end of the world. If you've never been hurt by the time you're 30, there is a good chance you did everything completely awesomely. And there's also a decent chance you just never trained hard enough. So it's not that we want injuries. It's just that if injury risk has to happen with some powerlifting and stuff like that, it does. It's decent. This is the best time in your life to accept that risk is what I'm trying to say. If you want maximum lifetime gains, that is, at some point in your life, reach your absolute zenith of genetic potential or whatever, starting to train early or middle of this range is critical. So if you want to be the best possible bodybuilder you could ever be, if you start training at like age 28 or 29, that might still happen. Not super likely. If you start training at age 18 or 19, very likely, right? And if you're age 15 and you're like, I want to be as jacked and strong as possible, who the fuck knows what's going on in your head? When I was 15, I had all kinds of fucking baloney in my head. If you're really intent, that's actually a good time to start working on basic size and strength. What you want to do in this age range, especially, is focus on the basic mass and strength, building the construction of raw mass and strength, a lot of times with compound heavy basics, not on details of strength and physique as much. So if you're age 15 to 30, especially in the early years, if you're like, yeah, I got to bring up my forearms to balance out my biceps, shut the fuck up. Just get big. Once you're big, you can bring up your forearms and other small muscle groups, no problem. Don't you worry too much about the details, inner chest and shit like that, if you want your maximum lifetime gains. Now, if you just want to be age 25 and have the best inner chest at the club, so all the girls are like, ooh, and the boys are like, ooh, and you both boys and girls, and tons of people having sex with your inner chest or whatever kind of shit you're into, by all means, specialize early. But if you want to be the biggest and strongest you ever be, don't worry about specializing earlier and through the middle of this range. Next up, if you're age 30 to 40 years old, what's going on? What can you expect? You get good responses generally to size and strength training. Once you get closer to 40, many people start to see a lowering of responses. That doesn't mean you get worse. It means you get better, notably slower. So if you're gaining muscle your whole life from, let's say you started training at age 15, by the time you get to 35, 36, 37, you can still gain muscle, but it's going to be noticeably slower than it was even if you, compared to like the age, 17, 18, 19 or something like that. And if you start lifting at 35, 36, 37, you're not going to get 18 or 19-year-old kind of growth rates. You're just not. Versus if you start, in your early 30s, you can get actually really comparable rates to when you start in early 20s, so on and so forth. So especially towards the end of that range, there's a bit of a muting on there. And it's not the best responses through that range anyway. Joint stress recovery is decent. Okay, so it's nothing too crazy. Your joints are going to be super fucked up. It's not super high risk. On average, if you get hurt during this age range, recovery is decent, nothing to write home about, but it can be lengthy and might not always be complete. Like sometimes when you hurt yourself when you're, let's say, 37, 38, 39, the shit might never feel 100% again, even if the doctors reattach it or even if it wasn't a full avulsion or something. It's just, it's not something you play with nearly as much. When you're young, a lot of times you get hurt and it's like nothing ever happened, right? If you started lifting in the 15 to 30 age range, 30 to 40 is when you usually hit, especially in the later 35 to 40, is when most people usually hit their absolute peak of strength and size, right? Some people hit it in their early 40s. We'll talk about them in the next category. But this, from a practical perspective, age 30 to 40 is where you start really focusing on details. Like if you need to bring up your forearms or something like that, that's when it's time to focus on the small details because you need them to squeeze out progress. It's also when you start focusing on the details with sort of exotic programming. You might do very high frequency for bicep because that's 2 to 4 sessions a week for biceps aren't just cutting it. You need really advanced routine, all kinds of crazy periodization. This is where you shoot all of your guns off if you want your lifetime best, because this is where your lifetime best is happening. If you wait until your 40s to do all your best techniques, your lifetime best might have already passed you by, right? 40 to 60 years old. So here's where we on average see significantly lower responses to size and strength training than you did in your 30s to 40 and than you did from 15 to 30. So almost everyone's going to see lowered average responses, which is to say if you start lifting in this age range, so someone starts lifting when they're 40 and they're like, let's say their training partner, and this actually happens a lot. Dad starts lifting, he's 42. He starts lifting with his son who's 17. Like this shit happens all the time. You see it in gyms all the time. It's nice. It's nice to see. If your dad do not, and let's say it's the first time for both of you, don't expect the same rate of gains as your son. Don't, because it's almost never going to happen. Very rarely. And it does if you gave your son dog shit genetics. You got to blame the wife. What the hell, honey? Right? So generally speaking, you just won't see nearly as good of growth rates as you did when you were younger. There is a big difference in this range, however. Ages 40 to 50, you can see some pretty decent gains, especially if you started training in that range. 50 to 60, you still see gains, but much, much lower on average. So there's a big sort of bifurcation in that range. The joint stress recovery is now longer, notably longer, which means heavy sessions should be less frequent, okay? You're not going to do Monday 5x5, Wednesday 5x5, Friday 5x5 heavy like you used to do back when you were 17 years old. That shit is fucking gone. What you might need to do is more lighter sessions, sets of 10 to 30 reps, a little bit more frequently interspersed between heavy ones. And the light sessions now make up a bigger fraction of your total volume than they used to because the joints just don't handle chronic recovery nearly as well as they used to. If you get hurt, there are potentially much more complicated avenues of recovery from those injuries that you sustain. So you want to make sure if you're age 40 to 60 and you're training with weights and you want your best results, that injury avoidance is huge in your training. Like, you don't do stupid shit anymore when you're 40 to 60. You're like, fuck it, I feel like a 1RM. Nah, that shit died when you turned 30. And once you were 30, you stopped doing stupid shit like that. Once you turned 40, you for sure started not doing stupid shit like that anymore because that'll cost you potentially all kinds of function. And they're like, well, we actually wanted to reattach your pec, but it's so calcified we can't do it anymore. You're like, oh my fuck, I just tore my pec and I'm never getting it back. You don't want any of that nonsense. So you really want to make sure you're training extra safe, which does mean not as effectively as you used to, but there's a huge trade-off. Do you want to keep training and making some gains or keeping some gains on your body, or do you want to risk it all for pretty much nothing, right? If you have started training in this range itself, okay, if you're 42 and you started training, you'll see really, really big changes for sure. Because some people have this misconception, hopefully this video refutes, that if they're in the 40s or 50s, they don't bother with weight training because like, oh, that's a young guy's game. You know, I'm not going to make gains. You will for sure make gains. If you start training and you're 42, fuck, you're going to make crazy gains for the first 5 years. And for the next 10 years, you're going to consistently still make gains. They won't be incredible, but like you can get stronger into your 50s and maybe even into your 60s and even bigger too, right? So if you start late, you can still have awesome progress here. If you started lifting in the 30 to 40 age range, you'll peak in that 40 to 60 age range. If you started lifting in the 15 to 30 range and have been serious, you'll probably peak between 30 or 40 or in your early 40s. And after that, in your 40s and 50s, and especially 50s and 60s, you may be able to hold your size and strength and or reduce it slowly. That's depressing as fuck to some people, but think of it this way. If you got up to benching 400 pounds when you were in your prime and, age 35 to 45, By the time that you're 60, you could only be benching 330. How many 60-year-olds you know bench 330? Holy shit, that's crazy. So at that point, it starts to, psychologically at least, be really beneficial for you to compare yourself to your age cohort. And that is awesome. And also, sometimes people at age 60 are having trouble where it's tough to get out of chairs. Or, what the fuck? I'm not young anymore. Fuck that. If you still squat, you used to squat 400. Now you only squat 300. 300-pound squatter is no problem getting out of a chair unless it's leg day, and then it's a real problem. All right. 60 plus years old, our last group here. Real talk, vastly lowered responses to size and strength training. You just don't see the same absolute or relative responses in people. Like if you have people who are older than the 60 do a resistance training program, they get some responses, but it's not nearly like 15 to 30-year-olds, so forget about that. There are big differences within this range. 60 to 75, you can see some pretty great responses. 75 plus is tough. You still get some stuff, but it's much tougher, much bigger difference. Your joint stress recovery times are now much longer. Heavy sessions need to be much less frequent. Lighter sessions more frequent, and probably most of the work should be light. So if you're lifting for sustainability in this age category, if you're over 60, I think most of your work should probably be in that 10 to 30 rep range. Some can be in the lower rep ranges, especially if you're pretty strong, but there's a trade-off there. There's a balance because you're not going to be able to do workout after workout after workout. It's a 5 to 8. It's just not going to work. In most cases, your joints are just not going to agree with that sort of thing. There is a lot of potential for complicated recovery from injury, and you want to make sure that injury avoidance is huge in your training. And more to the point, you may want to do sort of like an anti-injury, an injury prevention checklist as kind of the core foundation of your training. And this is a weird way to think about it. I don't want any of you younger folks to think about it this way, because this would be a bad way for you to think about it. When you're older, job number 1 in the gym, don't get hurt. Job number 2, get results, right? The thing is, for younger people, it's flipped the other way. Job number 1 is get results. Job number 2 is okay, but don't get hurt doing it. If you're older, the last fucking thing you want to do is tear some shit up in the gym. Fuck that, because you could recover. It could take you a year to recover. You could never recover. It could start unlikely but possible, a series of events where you just never leave the hospital and you just fucking die there. Like, you're not going to, you evulse your quad or something under the squat bar, and then on the way down your femur shatters and all the fucking ICU and you're 77 years old. You don't want any part of that. Injury management first. So for sure, all the dumb shittery in the gym should be out of your body by the time you're this age range. And if you're still a dumbass when you're 75, I don't fucking know what to say to you. You had it coming your whole life, quite literally. If you start lifting in this range, a lot of people start lifting in their 60s and 70s and 80s, you will see the most life-altering changes that anyone else will. Look, if you're 15 years old, you start lifting, great, you get bigger, your pecs pop out, girls notice a little, guys notice a lot. Your life fundamentally doesn't change. Usually you don't get laid much more anyway. Whatever, sweet, you're muscular, yahoo, slow clap. You had no problem going to a fast food place and ordering a burger, putting it in your car in the bag, driving home, feeding like part of the bun to your dog, sitting and watching TV. You could do that when you're jacked. You could do that when you're skinny. It doesn't fucking matter. When you're 75 years old or 80 years old, if you start training with weights, you can upgrade yourself to just like a normal 40-year-old's abilities physically. And then you can take care of yourself until the fucking day you die. And if you don't do that, you could be in a place where you are physically not strong enough to get up out of a chair anymore. You may not be strong enough to reach for normal objects like a thing of milk or something like that. You're in a bad way. So these changes, it's super like if we're looking at public health of the world, do the various agencies responsible for that tell young people to lift weights? Like, not really, because you're fucking young, whatever, fine, you're fine. But older people absolutely should be lifting weights in almost every circumstance, because for them, that alteration is huge. So here's the thing. Yes, the first part of the slide here says vastly lower response to size strength training. You may look at it and say like, oh, fuck that. Why the hell would I train? My grandma wants me to train her. She's 62. Fuck would I do that? Like, come on, grandma, you're fucking too old. Like, the gym's not your place anymore. The gym is mostly for grandma. She belongs to the gym more than the rest of us do. We're just doing this for recreation. She's doing it to sustain her independent way of life. Really, really, really big deal. Make sure we have to start saying that. If you started lifting in the 40 to 60 range, you might peak here, especially in your early 60s, but begin to reduce size and strength in your 70s and 80s. It's just not realistic to be benching 400 pounds when you're 80 years old. And all the other groups, folks that started much earlier, started in the 30s, started in their 20s and teens, they'll get smaller and weaker through this range. However, big point, I'm going to make this point again in the last slide, smaller and weaker is relative. And if you're 70 years old and you only bench 150 pounds, where you used to be, a 350-pound bencher back in your prime, yeah, that kind of fucking blows, right? I wish we were all immortal and infinitely strong. But if you're in your 70s and benching 150, you fucking think anyone needs to help you with a fucking jug of milk? Fuck that. You fucking 150, you're overqualified, right? That's a big ass jug of milk you have to get out of the fridge, right? So it's a huge dividend. Still awesome to keep lifting weights. And as a matter of fact, relatively speaking, much more awesome to lift weights in this age range than at any other time. So if you're watching this video and you're like getting into your 40s and shit, you're like, fuck, I should stop lifting. Don't do that. Keep lifting. Keep lifting. All right. Lastly, a few important take-home messages. So a lot of people ask this, super common. So hopefully you folks are tuning in. I started lifting at XYZ age. Can I still get amazing results? Can I still have my ultimate potential? The answer is no. So you're very unlikely to reach your ultimate genetic potential if you start lifting after age 30. Okay. And the later after age 30 you have started lifting, the less likely you are to reach that maximum genetic potential. It's just a statement of fact. It sucks. I wish it wasn't that way, but you can still get jacked and strong. Absolutely. And relatively way more jacked and strong than you would have ever been without lifting, for sure. Now, point number 2, huge point. If you're not in your 20s or teens anymore, do not lift like you did in your 20s and teens. Youth rewards the bold. So someone's like, what do you think? 5 more pounds? PR? You're like, fuck yeah, load that shit. Boom, age 25, let's do it. If you're older, age rewards the cautious and the patient. Okay, so if you're 55 years old and your training partner's 52 and he's like, what do you think? 5 more pounds? Like, Jim, shut the fuck up. Put a regular weight on the bar. Let's not die here today so we can come back tomorrow and the day after and the day after, right? Huge, huge thing. One of the things that I wouldn't even call as a pet peeve is just kind of fucking sad. Pet peeves annoy you, but I don't know what this is like. It's just like a depressing thing. When I see older people, like older, doing bro gym fuckery, swing curls and round back crazy cat, like kind of deadlift where you're like, are you a cat getting scared on Halloween or are you deadlifting? I can't tell. It's like, what are you doing? Like, you can't afford to get hurt. Why are you doing this? Dumb shit needs to stop when you're younger. Ideally, it wouldn't happen when you're younger, but at the very least, it should happen when you're older. It should stop happening when you're older. As you get older, especially than 30, we'll say 30 is kind of the general cutoff here. You want to put more emphasis into the following things. These should always be things you put some emphasis into, but really start to basically grow up. Actually, is an exact perfect term for this. Listen to your body more. Warm up more and more slowly. Take your time. Rushing warm-ups when you're in your 20s, whatever, shit happens, right? You got fucking hose to bang at the club. You can't take 30 minutes to warm up. When you're 36 years old, like I am in this video, you're going to warm up. Otherwise, you're going to get hurt. And then you're really, really fucked. Like, you just can't afford to rush things anymore. Ramp up volume and load slowly in mesos. Again, you should still be doing that. But when you're older, you especially should be doing that because you're going to fuck yourself up if you don't. Accumulated fatigue goes like this, and injury risk goes like that as well. Next one. Don't risk it all. He's about to risk it all. Isn't that like a joke about like hitting on someone? In any case, I'm not much in the Instagram generation. So risking it all for big PR as often is a fucking stupid idea. Like, look, when you're like 19 years old and you just pulled 405 and it went way fast, and that's the most you've ever pulled, you look around, your friends are like 455 and you're like, fuck yeah. And it doesn't come up, whatever, shit happens. Or it comes up halfway and you tweak your back, whatever, 3 weeks later, you're fine. I'm not saying it's a good idea. It's just not the worst thing in the world. Now, when you're 55 years old and you hit 370 for the first time ever in the deadlift and someone's like, we think 405, you're like, yeah, you're a fucking idiot. Don't do stupid shit like that. Work up to it over the couple of weeks. Don't risk it all. Because you could be like, oh, sweet, I just herniated my fucking discs in my back and I can't control my bladder anymore and I'm going to spend 3 months at the hospital. None of that shit is for you, right? So don't do anything dumb anymore. And you can still train close to failure, but you probably want to train more with lighter weights, and you want to train a little bit less with sets of 1 to 3 for strength, and you want to keep it more in the sets of 3 to 6 range if strength training is your thing. And for hypertrophy training, stay a little bit outside of the 5 to 10 range for most things, or the things you can, and go a little bit more in the 10 and 20 and 20 to 30 range, because you still get great hypertrophy, but it doesn't risk with the high absolute forces injury just as much. Now, here's the thing. Point number 4, last point. The super bright side about lifting through the aging process. It sucks flat out to get older, to get weaker as you age. It fucking blows. I'm level with you guys. I agree. There's a lot of people try to paint like this happy picture. There's one lecture I was listening to about anti-aging medicine and potential future stuff. This guy like refuted the concept of like aging gracefully. He's like, aging fucking blows. There's no way to do it gracefully. You just look less like shit than you thought you would have. So I'm totally on board with that. It fucking blows. But if you stick to hard lifting throughout your lifespan, you have a very good chance of dying with the strength of an average untrained 30-year-old. Now, none of us here watching this video want to have the strength of an average untrained 30-year-old. That fucking blows. Some fucking like computer programmer guy who's never lifted. You're like, great, I'm as strong as this guy, even though I've been lifting weights my whole life. But you're 85. He's 30. What realistic real-world shit can a 30-year-old untrained man not do? The answer is not anything. Our society's designed for a 30-year-old man of average strength. Matter of fact, he's overqualified because most things in society, like opening up your car door. You could be a fucking 10-year-old and open up your car door, reaching for things that are a little bit heavy, shopping by yourself, pushing a cart, taking a backpack and slinging it over your shoulder. If you're the strength of an average, have you ever seen an average 30-year-old struggle with putting a backpack on and be like, what the fuck is wrong? Are you sick or some shit? So if you die, if you're at your later years with the physical strength, at least, up until the last couple of months or who knows, of the average 30-year-old, oh my fuck, there was never a single time in your life where you were unable to care for yourself, you weren't able to travel, you weren't able to hike and do all of your favorite things. Which brings me to my last story about one of my grandparents. He, 10 or 15 years back, he died. He fought in World War II on the Russia side, killed a whole shitload of Nazis, did all kinds of unspeakable shit that every now and again when he got a little tipsy, he would start talking about and like, holy fuck, war's fucked up. He's like 90 years old when he died, or in his very late 80s. And he died in America. He was walking. He was gardened his whole life. He was always physically active. He never formally lifted weights, but he lifted heavy objects all the time. He moved big pots of plants around and soil. He's always stayed active. So it's basically resistance training, right? A bunch of people his age went to nursing homes and all this other crazy shit and spent the last 10 or 20 years of their life sitting in a chair watching TV or laying in a bed and watching TV. He walked around all the time. He was always independent. He went shopping by himself. The way he died was he was walking just down a path in a suburban neighborhood in like fucking Ohio or some shit, and he felt it fucking coming. He's like, I'm fucking dying. He just sat down by the side of a tree, leaned back, and just died right there sitting. Fucking died like a baller king. That's fucking amazing. And up literally until the last day, up until the very day that he died, he was completely independent and needed nobody's help. If you lift weights, you have a very high chance of dying like that. If you don't lift weights until you're older, or you never pick up lifting weights, you could die after 30 years of machines taking care of you in a nursing home. Which one you want? Folks, thanks for tuning in. When you die, die well.